Hey guys, you're listening to the From the Bench podcast presented by Projectile Warehouse. And tonight's guest is Mr. Rusty, who has made this whole venture possible right from the start. And this is going to be a little bit of a catch-up chat on where we've sort of got to after starting and where we've ended up now and where we're going in the future. And yeah, just a bit of a catch up with Rusty.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know Rusty, which I think would be a little bit impossible for people to listen to this podcast and not know who you were.
Many people don't
But there
know.
may be some people that listen to this podcast that just know me and don't know you. That would be kind of cool if they existed. If you exist,
I'm sure there's plenty. There's plenty of people that exist that know you and don't know me in this context. There's a lot.
But Rusty heads
you've been
up.
on Netflix.
Yeah, that's true. In other capacities, not for From the Bench podcast.
Not yet.
Been on Netflix.
Not yet. There's still time.
We will get there. Marvel money, we are chasing it. We're coming for that big Marvel film.
Yeah, that's right.
Rusty heads up Projectile Warehouse and does a lot with the Precision Rifle Series in Australia. Bit of a prolific figure in anything to do with shooting in this country.
Let's just narrow that down to the rifle side of things. I'm pretty useless at shotguns, but
hey, you have a go.
I will have a go. I actually started off shooting shotgun. Anyway, that's an entirely different story that's not to do with reloading and unrelated. But I appreciate catching up, man. And I think you're about 8 episodes in or so.
Yes.
And I thought it'd be great to ask you about how's it going. And we went away and did some loading the other week and just talk about some of that sort of stuff. So how's it? Now I completely turned this around to you.
This is like
Sorry, man.
This is a dual host job.
Yeah.
Who's hosting? No one's hosting.
No
this
one's
is a
hosting.
mutual.
It's self-hosted.
It's
self-hosting.
Yeah. We'll ask each other questions that we want to know.
I will ask you
me with the first
question. How has it been delving into this project? I know it's still relatively early days for a podcast, but you've now done it enough where you feel comfortable getting in front of it and chatting away. And no doubt you've met people and had conversations both online and offline that have sort of come out about from kicking this off. Tell us how it's going. What have you learned?
I've learned that the deeper I dive into this reloading thing, that
the deeper it gets.
Yeah, it gets so deep, but also how much more money it's going to cost me. Like starting this podcast is not saving me any money because the more things that I learn about reloading, the more things I realize that there's other stuff I have to buy. So I hope my girlfriend isn't listening to this right now.
She's not.
Oh, yeah, she wouldn't be following. That'd be, yeah. Anyway,
don't think about that too long.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting. It's amazing how varied everyone's opinions are on reloading, or not opinions, because there's some hard and fast rules. Like there's some things that are non-negotiable, just with the laws of physics and science and what's happening inside the case and what's happening inside the rifle. But how varied people's processes are, and in the way they go about achieving what they want from the rifle. And that's where I think I see a lot of people falling apart, is they don't have a process or they don't know which one to follow. Like new reloaders or even experienced reloaders that are trying to take their reloading to the next step, they're trying a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and they kind of don't have a set process of how to go about finding what's working and what's not working. And everyone I talk to that's experienced and that is doing it well and getting the results they want are so clear and thorough with how they do it. And they've been doing that same process for a long time. And they might make little tweaks here and there as they want to try new things. But that's something that I've learned on the way. It's like, okay, you've got to you can't just throw some things together and then hope it's going to, come together. You've got to know why you're doing each step. And that's been really, really interesting to hear the different processes, even though they're different, they're getting the same result, like just because that process is clear and thorough for people. And I'm sort of developing my own, I guess, for what's working for me.
I think it's a fascinating element of reloading, which was why doing this podcast is such an interesting venture. The diversity, as you talk about in that process, where you're ending up at the same results or equivalent results, but the method to get there is quite diverse. And that's where I think you get a lot of, in forums and Facebook groups and such, you get a lot of debate and a lot of, oh, don't do that, that's stupid. I've done, do it this way and that way. And I think there's many channels to get to where you're going. And not only are there many ways of doing it, there is also multiple desired outcomes and varied desired outcomes, and the outcome from guys who are trying to shoot 2 or 3 kilometres is very different to the guy that wants to shoot pigs and who will say, no, mate, this is fine. This is, whatever it might be. You don't have to worry about that or that, because in their experience, they hit the damn pig every time, and therefore, why would you bother?
Yeah,
it works.
adding extra steps to the process.
It works, yeah.
Also been interesting to see the gun industry can be a little bit resistant to change. Like seeing how something new or a new idea on a lot of, maybe that's just humans in general. A lot of people, it's rare to find those personalities that are adaptive to going, okay, this goes against what I do, and this is different than how I would view it, but I'm not going to say it's wrong. I'm going to give it a go for myself. And that's something that I like to pride myself on in all areas of things that I've done in my life, is let yourself be challenged by other stuff, even if it's from someone less experienced. Doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. They might have a new thing that you might not have tried yet. And so being open to doing stuff. And I think the people that end up at the top of the heap in their respective fields and in reloading in general, who end up having the best outcomes, are probably those personalities that are happy to take something on. And even if they don't go and try it, they sit and mull over it to decide whether it's worth trying or not, rather than just being like, nah, that doesn't work. Yeah. That's not what we do. Jam the bullet into the lance every time. That's just how you do it, Well, okay, that might be working for you. That's great. There might be some other ideas that you could try as well. It's not going to hurt you to try something else. Yeah,
other ways do exist. Other methods do exist. Yeah, and I think the reloading is interesting in that it is so detailed, and so you may have tried. The example you gave was jamming projectiles into the lands. So you may have tried seeding them out further, and it failed miserably. That doesn't mean that with every projectile, every combination, or every scenario, or everything, that's not going to work. It also doesn't mean that you went out, you may have hit the really bad spot where it doesn't work, and perhaps you needed to go further. And we found that in a recent experience we had. But I think that is the joy of, well, some people would say the curse of reloading is there's so many variations, so much, and it could be, you talked about a press giving you a problem that you didn't realise was a factor until you bought some more expensive or fancier ways of measuring it. Yeah. And then you realised, oh, hang on, this is unrelated to what I thought the problem was, but this is a factor and plays a role. We'll get into that. But I think that because there's such intricate detail that can happen, that to be able to cast an area off as that's pointless or that's rubbish or something like that is unwise. Yeah, because there's so much variation in lots, and that's where I think your guests so far and your continual guests in future will bring lots of versions, lots of variations. I suspect listeners will think, oh, no, that sounds terrible. But chance is that the person you're interviewing about whatever it is has tried it and is finding it works for them. So I find reloading a fascinating world because of the many channels to success and the how many different little factors can play a big role in resulting to having a win. Yeah, it's endless. I was thinking about this like just yesterday. I got stuck on this loop, where you think about something and you're stuck on a loop and you can't solve it and you're just kind of going around. And it was the whole battle between, and I hadn't thought of this until we had Steve here and we're talking to Steve a lot about your seating depth changes your internal case capacity of the case, right? Yep. You've got a certain amount of powder in there, and then there's an air gap or no air gap if it's a compressed load. And you've got a projectile. Now, if you're playing with seating depth, it's changing the pressure inside the case as well. And I was kind of like,
oh wow, so like you do, let's say you just stick with one seating depth and you try a whole different heap of powder charges and you find your node that you're like, sweet, it runs awesome across all these powder charges. That's where I'm running it, right in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go and play with seating depth. Well, essentially you're then actually changing the internal capacity, which can then change the node for the powder charge.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's this like weird loop. So then you kind of go, well, but seating depth is important because you have to play with it to bring the groups down. But then like you kind of go from one to the other and then back and then back and then back. So you play with a new seating depth for that powder charge. And then you play with new powder charges for that seating depth. And then a new seating depth for that powder charge. Like it kind of was like this loop. I was like, where does it end? And it was going around and around. And that was super fascinating to me. Yeah. I was just like, wow, like there is so much detail in that. But it's because you're trying, like your barrel harmonics and stuff like that, we don't really have a way to measure what's going on when our rifles are shooting with the harmonics of the barrel. You don't have a graph that prints out to go, this is the way the barrel is whipping and this is what's happening inside. The only measurement we've got is what ends up happening on the target.
What's happening downrange, yeah.
And so you do have all these variables and these sometimes what feels like endless variables, but then you've just got to get to the point where you're getting the desired outcome on the targets and where the distances you want to shoot or whatever. So there's something to be said about that really finicky approach and being like so intense about all of those things. But then there's also something to the approach of someone like an Andy Little who's like, yeah, I don't do any of those things. I simplify it. I throw some stuff in there and I get it doing this. And it's like he's kind of just letting the target tell him if it's working or not. And then he's changing some stuff or whatever, but he's not. I don't know. I maybe don't know Andy's process as much as like I haven't been there while he's reloading, but he doesn't necessarily stress about the things that he can't understand of what's happening, and he only stresses about what he needs to, and that's is the rifle shooting adequately for what I need to do with it? If not, we'll address it. If so, cool, let's keep going.
It's a very practical way of loading. Is very responsive to okay, is it working well? Yep. Great. Let's no one breathe.
Yeah, let's charge on.
let's
no one tell me why it's working.
Yeah, let's just go.
Let's just go.
But I guess and that's certainly that is effective. And I think as you develop more, and perhaps that's where you're on the track to developing and understanding more. I'm going to ask you about what you've learnt a lot recently, but almost the more you know, the harder it can almost become in some ways because you become aware of these other factors that exist that you didn't think or care about before.
Yeah.
And then, you don't know what you don't know, and therefore you just work with what you've got.
Yeah.
But I think there's a real balance there, and I think some people do get put off reloading because they just start unpacking it and realising there is so much.
Yeah.
But I think that the important thing to remember is the results you want will drive that. And you go, you know what, I'm reloading to save some money and improve my accuracy by a little bit. Great, go for it. Or I'm reloading to not save money, but I want a bit better accuracy for 300 meters on foxes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I think there's never going to be a negative, in my opinion, to having more knowledge. Like there's never going to be a negative to upskilling to the point where you know absolutely everything, like every detail about how it works and why it works the way it does and what, some other people are doing and why they're doing what they're doing. Like there's never going to be a negative to saturating yourself with that knowledge about reloading. But as long as your expectation alongside of that doesn't get ahead of where you're at. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I would feel like I would say I'm someone who's soaked myself with knowledge very early on and continuing to, but I've had to keep myself in check as far as, although I'm soaking myself with all this knowledge of people that have been doing it for a long time and I'm learning off a lot of really great guys, I can't expect that I'm going to necessarily get the results that they're getting just because my experience level is still quite low. So I'm kind of having to bring down my expectation, but continue to soak in that knowledge and go, it's okay to know a lot about this and still be, a medium level reloader. You know what I mean? Still be okay. I'm striving for expert. I'm striving to be that guy who can, just wring every last thing out of his gun and keep it on point all the time across every batch that I reload. I'm striving to be that guy, but it needs to be you need to be okay with not quite being that guy yet, but striving to get there and just getting what you need to get pushed what you want.
So since you started the podcast, what are some of the key lessons you've sort of taken away from guests or conversations you've had sort of around that have changed your processes, like specific changes in your process?
Like we were talking about having a process. So that's the one. Like, the fact of having a bit of a mission on how you're gonna test.
Okay.
What you're gonna do, and then the repeatability of it. Like Plushy was very clear on his repeatability of his process, and that was something I started, implementing in my reloading room and buying, an annealer and different things to kind of go, okay, I need to get to a point where what I'm doing is the same every time rather than just this one-off time, and then the next time I make a batch of ammo, it's different than that time. So the consistency in my components and consistency in my process has been something. Heck, who else have we talked to? Constantly reminding myself to try and not overthink it as well. That's sort of something that I've picked up from talking to Andy. Not overthink it. He's had some amazing results in PRS matches. That's the sport I love competing in, and he probably worries less about stuff than I do. He rang me to ask me a question the other day about reloading stuff. I'm thinking to myself, like, why are you ringing me? Like, you've been doing this longer than I have, and you've had better results on a national level than I have so far. But that's simply because he doesn't have he doesn't want to know as much as I want to know about, just because of a different personality type. So I learned from him to kind of just like I was saying to you, be okay with getting what you get and just confident in running it. Who else have we talked to? Man, talking to Steve, that was wow.
Yeah, well, that was Steve Hurt is an experience, and this will be coming out just after those podcasts go out, which haven't yet to hit the airwaves. But what a guy! Like in terms of knowledge and I mean, it's just a nice bloke anyway. But we got to hang out with him for a number of days. We did an event out north at Ignition Custom, and then the next night we backed it up here.
Yeah.
And then you guys did the podcasts here the next day. And I, as of this point, I haven't listened to them. They've been on the edit suite with Josh.
Yep.
And then we went away and loaded. Well, we went back to my place and loaded with him, and then went and shot with him for a day, and then shot a comp with him. Yeah. Well, he didn't come up for that one, but obviously for those for those who have listened to those episodes, I mean, the guy really has a deep understanding of reloading, but he's continually striving to learn. And I saw a number of occasions over that week that he was here that he would be asking people about their experiences and trying to take what he could from theirs.
Yeah.
What did you? Is there certain things that you picked up from those couple of podcasts or the sessions we had with him?
From a hunting point of view, running like his reasonings behind running the monolithics, running the copper projectiles, I wasn't sold on it going in. Like before we had Steve over, I've always been a big advocate for fast expansion, and I've spoken about that on the podcast before. I from what I've seen from the shooting I've done on the game that I've shot, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I've seen that bullets that expand fast have worked so effectively for me. And I just thought to myself, why would you want monolithic copper? I thought it was for shooting buffaloes, when you need deep penetration. But when he was able to explain it and sort of show like his projectiles the way that they're still mushrooming, they're still opening up on, softer game, and they're still getting expansion and dumping energy. They're then just cutting a straight path and continuing to drive. And I thought to myself, wow, like, the animals that I have lost have always, well, not lost, but haven't dropped when I've wanted it to. With culling stuff, I've thought it's always been when the shot either placement has been less than adequate or the way the animal presented itself to me has been less than adequate. And I was like, if I had been using a copper projectile, one of Steve's projectiles, maybe I would have had a better result, because it would have been able to continue to drive to vitals when the shot placement or the, was less than adequate. And I was like, wow, this is so true, because you sort of, nothing ever happens in a perfect world. And that fast expanding bullet, if it was in a perfect world and every one of my shots were placed exactly where I wanted them on the animal that I was out to, its desired target, great. But nothing ever happens perfectly. And he was sort of explaining that. He was explaining things, you can't control what happens in the field, and things are sometimes less than adequate or whatever. And you're buying that little bit of leeway, that little bit of forgiveness to make those effective, clean kills. And that's what we should be, after as hunters or as, people harvesting meat for eating or for production or whatever they're doing. So I was like, well, that was really cool, because I'd had my opinion changed. Like I went in going like, these copper projectiles, in my mind, I thought they had a place purely for someone who was meat harvesting and wanted every last bit of meat on the animal and didn't want to have to deal with lead fragments in the animal. I thought that was their narrow window of what they were really designed for.
Really big game.
Or huge game.
Drop the thing.
Yeah, where you need massive penetration on a big buffalo or something like that. But then having my idea about that switched and changed to going, no, these have a place in so many other areas, was really cool.
Yeah, so we went out, we went and did some load development on my 6mm Creedmoor. Not in the most ideal of circumstances.
Very much, I would say that was not ideal
which
whatsoever.
Was my own undoing by forgetting my brass and leaving it not at your place but at my place.
Cheeky
which is
7-hour drive turnaround.
Yeah, 3.5 hour drive each way to do that. But I went back and got it, and you guys probably just relaxed because I wasn't around, so that's probably good.
It made things pretty stressful, because we ended up, you were shooting your final groups under
at night.
Yeah, at night under lights. And I wouldn't even say they were they weren't supposed to be final groups. They were supposed to be halfway through the day groups, and then we were going to continue to develop.
We probably cut the process short. Yeah. But I found that process. So Steve sort of gave us some data, cranked through some data, and gave us sort of that information. That's where our start was.
What program was that he got that initial data from again?
He uses a number of programs when he does that data. QuickLoad is one of the ones people will be most familiar with, but I do believe he runs it through a couple of programs to sort of cross-check information. Obviously, if he's giving that information out professionally, he wants to ensure that it is covered, checked and triple-checked. So I think he talks about using 5 different. You've probably said on the podcast, I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm pretty sure he ran it. QuickLoad sort of generated the data we used, and maybe another 2 or 3 programs checked it, and that was that put us pretty close, pretty quickly, and then we just played with a little bit of powder variation and seeding depth. But we start at 50 thou or something, moved out to 60 and saw some potential. And we think that going to 65 or 70 was going to be. Yeah,
we were going further.
I think we went to 65 and it was improving. So I'm yet to try it a little bit further out. I'd like to. Yeah. I think that would be good. But there was some real promise on that.
Yeah, there wasn't it was interesting because it wasn't. Like you said, it was ballpark very quickly.
Yes.
There wasn't a bad group. There wasn't anything there that you probably
Only what I did. What I did.
There were some things that you did that were very questionable. So there wasn't anything bad there for myself, like how anal I am is I would have wanted to keep tuning. Like for me, I was like, nah, like we can get that tight. We can definitely get that group down and have them touching.
Yeah, but we had to go to the pub.
We had to go, yeah.
So some important things. But yes.
there was a lot. There was a lot to do. We had time frames to meet.
Right.
So for me, I was like, the potential was there. I saw the potential, and I was like, we can get this better. You were happy with what it was, and you thought that was
happy enough for where we needed to be.
Yeah.
And look, primarily we were testing my load and also shooting a video to just sort of capture what we're doing. So for those points, it was fine. There was going to be further opportunity in future to work with that.
Yeah.
So that's why I wasn't hung up on nailing it perfectly then. Yeah. But certainly like a lot of promise.
Was there anything different in the process done with Steve that you had never seen before, or that you haven't done in the past for your reloading? Or
I
is it all-
haven't shortcut that quickly to a like a solution that gets us on. Like I've had to go through the process of like, yeah, that's terrible. Oh, it's getting better. Oh, that's looking all right. Oh, no, that's dropped off again type finding nodes. Whereas we pretty much went on to a side of a node straight away and then worked our way onto it. And then, we think we might have a little bit more room in that node or it can fall off. The other thing that I'm prepping for is that the match I'm shooting is the Darwin match. So I'm also mindful that I actually want to be on the underside of that node a little bit, because when I go to Darwin, it's going to be a lot warmer. It's probably going to have a boost in velocity. And so I kind of want to be on the lower side of that node because I don't want to tip too far the other way. I don't want to be at the high point on it and then tip off of it. When my next major shoot, or my only major shoot, is the Darwin match.
That's something that I've been testing recently quite a lot. Just before our last club match, I dropped my load back significantly. Look, well, I wouldn't say significantly, but dropped the charge from where I was, because I was playing with sort of seeing how wide I could get that node, like you're saying, from the slowest shot. I was looking at group size and my slowest shot versus like one that was radically faster. If I could get a group to shoot, like still shoot a nice group with that big extreme spread. And when I was at my original charge where I was, it was shooting really good groups. It was shooting really, really well at distance as well. But anything far north of that, faster, there was still some good groups, but it was a different point of impact. So it shifted the group, like it shifted the group.
It was sporadic.
Yeah, so the group was kind of here, and then anything slower was like let's say like low and left, and anything faster was high and right? So I was like, okay, well, so they're all good groups, but I want to be at a load where if it goes faster or slower with my my load, I want to be at a point where they're still shooting relative same point of impact. So my zero doesn't change because I don't want to be chasing zero. And that's something I found that as loads have slightly changed or variance in a different batch of powder or different batch of projectiles, they've still shot good groups with what I've been doing, but there's been little shifts in the zero. So like it's still just shooting a different point of impact. And so by slowing the load down, I found that let's say 20, 30 feet per second faster was still the same zero. It was still shot within region of what I would say was acceptable at 100 meters, like to still be in my zero zone. And anything slower was actually bang on. They were still dropping in the same group. So I timed that barrel so that the slow ones were bang on, and anything faster was just like a little bit higher, but like nothing drastic. Whereas when I was at that higher speed, it might have been a better group, but I didn't have that leeway either side of it. And that's something like you're saying, we go to Darwin and it speeds up. Well, okay, so my point of impact's changed, and then I'm at the range going, do I trust my zero from home and leave it, or do I start playing with my zero here in Darwin, and be freaking out before a match? So that's interesting that you've said that, because that's sort of where my head was at too leading into that match.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very mindful. I mean, I don't shoot a ton now, but that's sort of the match I'm looking forward to, and so I'm building everything around that at this stage. So we'll see.
Yes.
See how it goes. Unless GT Brass arrives, and then we have to start the whole process again very quickly, which may actually happen.
And then Taylor's tailored ammo will
have to come into
action. You have to send me the gun and the ammo and just go take a week off work and make me something. I'll go gladly.
Yeah. Oh, who knows? Who knows? We'll see what happens. See what Alpha Brass has in store for us.
Yes. Something that's been cool for me recently has been I bought a set of I don't even know how you say the word, Mitutoyo.
Sure, let's roll with
something
that.
Like Mitutoyo vernier calipers, digital calipers, and I had quite cheap ones before that, and was still getting good results, but didn't really realize how much was to be discovered. I wouldn't say gained, because I've gained a hole in my bank account, not necessarily the calipers. Yes, were an expensive buy, but now the amount of other things
lost you a lot of money.
The amount of other things I'm going to have to replace on my press and different things because of the amount of variance that I wasn't seeing before because the calipers purely weren't picking it up. We're talking, seating depth consistency and shoulder bump consistency and things like that, that I was kind of chucking them on the other calipers and going, oh, yeah, sweet, they're all heaps close. They're all within 1 thou. Well, my other calipers probably couldn't tell the difference between 1 thou and 10. So now that I've got a really good set of verniers, that's something I'd suggest to everyone, that is money well spent, because you'll catch things out. You'll be going, oh, why is this load not shooting very well? This seating depth must suck. Well, that seating depth that you thought you were at, you're actually anywhere from the number you wanted to 5 thou below it and 5 thou above it, and maybe more in some cases. So now I'm kind of going, all right, there's some things I need to change on my press, some little things I need to tweak and get rid of, some quick change bushings and different things like that.
You're talking about your quick change bushings and the Lee quick breech lock bushing, I think it is. If you twist that from side to side, there is give in it.
It locks into a set position, but there's a little bit of wiggle room.
There's definitely wiggle room.
And you can orientate it sort of hard to the right or hard to the left, or let it float in the middle.
Yep.
And I thought the difference between middle, right or left would be not really measurable.
Not a lot.
But it is measurable. When you've got calipers that can measure that difference, you go, oh, wow, okay. So it gives me a lot of hope, actually, that I was still getting good results even with that amount of variance, which shows me that I must be doing a good job at getting in that ballpark zone well. And now I'm going to be able to really hone in on the exact number that I want for, setting depth or different things.
I'm super curious because it's very easy to throw money at problems and then find more problems and throw more money at it. But I'm very curious to see what practical effects, coming back to Andy Little, who we seem to be referencing far more than we should for a reloading podcast, but coming back to his principle of just, hey, look, if it works, it works. And
if you didn't know that problem was there, then maybe you'd be better off.
Yeah, you'd certainly be richer.
Yeah.
But the question is how does that play out? Does it have an effect? And it'd be interesting to see your journey, and no doubt you'll keep people abreast of it. But I changed this over, and now it's there's no quick change. It's a permanent sort of setup, and I have seen like a slight increase in my seating depth consistency, and my groups, while they're not any tighter, they're continually tighter.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the way it's going to go.
It's that consistency.
I think it's the repeatability of the process is going to be better. And when you eliminate those variables, we're coming back to like what Plushy was saying, well, like any of the guys were saying, what Steve's saying, if you can do the same thing every single time, even if it's who was it? I think it was Steve that said that maybe on one of the reloading nights here. He said, even doing the wrong thing if you consistently do the wrong thing, is still a consistency. So it's still a platform you can work from.
I think, was that Plushy?
Anyway,
it doesn't matter who it was.
Someone said
someone go check the video. It's it'll be up online.
But yeah, that was about like consistency is the key, and it is the main thing, because then you have a base. You're not chasing your tail. So I think it's just going to save me those little headaches where I go like, man, like this thing was hammering. It was absolutely one hole hammering, and now my load is like still hammering, but it's kind of like high and right, and it's just a bit sporadic. Like what's changed? And it's just going to be to the point where the load is the same every time. So that's obviously.
And I think there's an element like you talked about knowing a lot, but where you not struggle with, where your weakness is experience, is just that depth of loads after years after round after round after round. And I think there's an element because that gives you a broader sample size, and so your comparisons become more meaningful because you're comparing these loads versus 1,000 others.
Yep.
Versus these loads versus 10,000 others.
Yeah.
And that's where I often get guys wanting to start reloading, talking to me, buying some kit, all that sort of gear, and they're like, all right, I'm going to get 10 sample packs of these projectiles, 10 different projectiles. I'm like, can I make a recommendation, mate? Buy 200 of this projectile and go and load. Yeah. Because, without being rude, your sample loads that you're going to make for these 10 different projectiles, you're going to have so many variations from your loading process or your loading experience that you won't see the benefit of this projectile over that one. Where, 200, 300, 400 rounds, you're going to have developed a feel for it. You're going to be able to load a good round, and then you're going to start seeing that this projectile behaves this way, this projectile behaves this way.
Or this process, a part of reloading has this consequence. Like this thing affects this thing and that thing.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, like if your variable is a projectile, you at least have a solid enough base. Even if you're doing the wrong thing consistently, variation from your consistent process will net a result of some sort. And that's, I think, we sell sample packs and that's a big thing, but I really dislike suggesting that for someone who's getting going. Here's 100, just load that 100.
I see that a lot with people talking on the internet saying like, oh, my gun doesn't like, X projectile. Like, oh, my gun doesn't like those bullets. So I went with these or whatever. And they didn't work for me or whatever. And I kind of, like a lot of times that may be the case, but I so often go, yeah, but like, did you really test that? Like, let's say you're within the parameters. You're not shooting a projectile that's made for a faster twist rate or whatever. You're shooting the right projectile in the right gun. It's made to be in that gun, and your gun's not broken, and your reloading process is solid. To just be able to say my gun doesn't like this projectile is a very hard and fast rule, because it's very it's most loads to a degree will be tunable. If it's within the parameters, you can get, if you've got the right components, you can get most things to shoot. So for that person to, like, you see it online all the time, to say my gun doesn't shoot this, are you saying to me that you went out and tested that projectile with 100 projectiles, 200 projectiles, 300 projectiles, and played with seating depths and powder charge and different primers and different things to really go, I flat out cannot get this projectile to shoot in my gun? Or did you try 5 and 10 at a factory spec recommended cartridge overall length? You didn't play with seating depth. You just left it at that recommended overall length that it said in the book, and you shot it across a few different powder charges, and the groups were horrible. And you went, okay, my gun doesn't like these projectiles. I'm going to go buy some different projectiles to try and get my gun to shoot, see what it likes. Well, your gun may have liked those first ones. You just didn't have a process in place to find where your gun liked shooting those projectiles. And I see that so often on forums, people going, my gun doesn't like this, my gun doesn't like that. And like you're saying, I don't know if people actually extensively test to get to that conclusion.
And I think that there is, if we're talking about the language used, like my gun doesn't like this, I would say my gun favours this.
Yeah, right.
And so if you do have 7 different projectiles you're using, right, that you're testing, and even if you only test 10 of them, now I'm not going to sit here and say that's a comprehensive test on every projectile, but you might find that 2 of them perform pretty well, and they're pretty robust in terms of you threw something at them and they showed some promise. All right, so do you spend time testing all 7 extensively with 200 rounds each, or do you grab those 2 that seem to show some promise and then delve into those 2? And I would say that those 2, as long as they meet your requirements for what the projectile can achieve, throw some time into those. It's an easy way to sort of find a couple of good potentials.
Yeah.
As long as they're going to achieve what you're aiming to achieve on the other side.
Yeah.
At that point, now you need to spend 100 projectiles with those 1s or 2s or whatever you end up with to see if that's not to say disregard the 5 that you rejected. Let's just say these 2 were the ones that showed some promise. Delve down those, and then if they don't go anywhere, they just not quite where I want it.
Yeah.
Revisit, go back to some of the others.
Because not everyone wants to spend huge amounts of time reloading and extensively reloading to get to that point. A lot of people want to do it quicker, and fair enough. And if you don't want to burn your barrel out, if you're shooting something that's quite overboard, quite a hot round, you don't want to go spend a couple hundred rounds developing your load, and then you wasted a lot of barrel life. Although I will say that I think I've seen, and other shooters have seen, that there's a certain amount of rounds needed down a barrel before it really settles in, before it gets to that point where you can develop a load and it be hammering, and then after 100 odd rounds or whatever, it's a different barrel. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of
I do know what you mean, and I think we come back to what we've talked about with reloading, in that there can be many channels to get to the same result.
Yeah. Because
I have across 2, possibly 3 barrels attempted to do exactly what you're talking about. And I have had mixed results. Now, I will also state 2 or 3 barrels is not a large sample size by any stretch. But one of them specifically, brand new barrel, I ran over chronograph, got all the data from the first 10 shots, and then we played barricades for the day. Ran the remainder of 200 rounds through and ran the chronograph over the last 20 rounds.
And that was like the same speed?
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that tiny little example instance, there was no variation that was noticeable.
What brand of barrel was that? Because I want to go buy one.
Was a Tikka.
It was just a Tikka factory barrel?
Yeah, that was a Tikka T3X A1. I can't remember what that. TAC A1. Yeah.
Wow.
That was one of those. And on that particular barrel, that's exactly what happened, and the data was the same. Nothing noticeable. And I did the same thing with another barrel, which was a custom barrel, as a Lilja. Same thing happened. Now, I also there are enough shooters that I respect who have gone out and done that and said after 200 rounds they have seen it increase in velocity. I'm not saying that is incorrect. All I'm saying is that I think that the cause of this discrepancy is that barrels perform differently and different things happen in different scenarios. And so I think that it's best case. I think best case is a couple hundred rounds down the barrel, because then you know that barrel is going to do that, because obviously some do perform that in that manner.
Yep.
Now, I'd love to see a massive test done on that across 30, 40 barrels, a much better sample size to really be able to say this is what happens, and this is why I didn't see any difference, and this is why other people do see a difference.
Yeah.
Because maybe the number varies from 50 rounds to 300 rounds because of X type of steel. I don't know. Yeah, right. But I'd love to see that, and whatever the results of that came out, I'd accept. I'd take, great, no worries, this is why. And so my testing is not extensive, not written on, not even done a video on it, because it was not extensive enough.
Yeah.
But that was my experience, and that's all I've got to be able to point to until there's.
Well, then another spanner you could throw in that works is, how are you cleaning the barrel? Do you know what I mean? Because some people could go
100%.
Okay, are we talking about a barrel that's just had this amount of rounds down it and zero cleaning, or are we talking about a barrel that's had this amount of rounds down it with heaps of cleaning? Like, all of that changes. So yeah,
absolutely, and that's where this is what I like, is that you can find a process that you swear by, and I can find a process that I swear by, because in my experience that has had this result, and I'm really happy with that. That's within my level of acceptance, and within your experience, that's done. And so there's an element of we could say superstition involved with that, is doing this, but there's an element of what matters, what tolerance level you have, and there's also a mental aspect of that as well, in that you know that you've done X with this barrel, or you've done X with this round, and therefore, reloading can be a big factor in a mental performance for a competition shooter, where I have loaded every single one of these rounds, and I've done this process with them, and they've gone through this single process, and that gives you an intangible benefit mentally to be able to shoot that match better.
Yeah.
And we've seen quite the opposite, where people have rushed and thought about it, or done something outside of their process, and they've fallen apart. And you're like, you're a much better shooter than that. And your ammo is actually stacking up numbers wise to be mint. In fact, this is the best ammo you've ever loaded. Yeah. But your performance came undone because you kept second guessing what you were doing. Yeah. And so I think that there are so many of these additional factors that that doesn't negate testing by any stretch, but these are often not factored in, and that's why you get so many different channels to success, which I think is exciting. I think it's good. It allows for discussion, for robust discussion and debate. And I've completely forgotten how we got on this point.
Yeah, no, I don't, but I don't think it matters. I think we covered some good ground. Something I'd like to sort of add in there to encourage people to do is, like we were just both saying, getting data collection across a broader spectrum is going to give you a better view of what's going on. And that's something I've done a lot of. And just the other day, I was looking back at photos of groups that I'd shot when I was first developing a load for this rifle with my current setup that I've got. same components. And I was looking at earlier loads, like photos of them compared to loads I was shooting now. And I picked up and I sort of had thought this in my head that this is maybe what was going on. But then when I went and looked at photos, I was like, no, that's totally what's happening. Early on, any of my projectiles like that were like when my seating depth was too deep, my loads had pretty good vertical, but there was a lot of like left and right. There was a lot of windage in the groups, so they were sort of spread, but there wasn't too much elevation. And when I had my seating depth like longer than where I ended up, it was almost the opposite. It's like it swapped. There was like a lot of vertical, but like not heaps of left and right, like not heaps of windage. And so what had happened was my load that was shooting really well had started getting windage, getting left and right, but there wasn't too much elevation happening to the group. I thought to myself, I've got a fair few rounds through this barrel now. My guess is that the lands have sort of eroded, the barrel's, wearing out.
Yep.
And so that jump is bigger than it was originally. And then when I went and looked at these photos, I was like, from my groups I'd been shooting when I was testing seating depth, I was like, well, that matches those photos that I'd taken, because when I was seated too deep and I was jumping a lot, it matched up with what was now starting to creep into my what was my bang on load. So all I did, like I didn't have time. I didn't want to go and have to sort of redo that whole seating depth process. So I just decided, I'm like, I'm going to pick a number like 5 thou, 5 or 6, 7, max 7 thou. Like I moved it forwards, and boom, it shot, like it sunk back down again. It was like the groups came back in good again, and that sort of answered my question for me. I was like, okay, well, so that was just a little bit of barrel wear. Like I've got quite a few rounds, shot a fair few matches and stuff on this barrel now. Obviously, the load was getting to the point where it's just starting to jump too far, and it wanted to creep forward. I don't recommend sort of chasing the lands. I didn't necessarily go and remeasure where the lands were and all of that. I just made a sort of an estimated guess on how many rounds I had down it, how far I thought maybe things had eroded, and it worked. So that was all I was able to make. I was able to make that educated guess on where I needed to be based on data collection, based on looking at what I'd previously done and what had netted me what results, and then go, this is what I'm going to try, and it worked for me.
Can I throw something to you to reference something you said earlier in the conversation?
Yes.
You talked about seating depth playing with the amount of pressure in your case. Now, can you quantify that your seating depth changed the jump to the lands, or was it the pressure or the way that powder interacted with the case to build up the pressure to push the projectile out that resolved your issue?
I can't quantify one way or the other. This is true. But I have actually also, it with the new seating depth, it shot well with the charge I was putting in it, but then it also shot well with, like I said to you, I've brought that powder charge down a little bit. So it shot well across both. So that sort of told me that I was in a jump node again. I was back in a nice jump node with the Hornady ELDMs that I'm running are not super jump sensitive. They've got big windows, I'm finding, on where they like to be.
But you haven't got data. I'm not
No, I saw what you're saying.
You haven't got data in the first case to see where your window is, because I'd be super curious to see if you had collected that sort of window of your node in the first slot when you shifted your seating depth, how that shifted that node
of
window.
The powder, the speed. Yeah.
And this is where I think a lot of stuff comes from, not misinformation, but perhaps a problem that's been diagnosed in a certain way and resolved. And you go, hang on, was the solution this, or was it this, or is it a combination in between? And that's where I think we end up with a lot of, no, seating depth fixed that. And then the other guy goes, well, I just changed my powder charge and it fixed it.
And that's something I have yet to answer, and I'm playing within my head at the moment. If you find a velocity node, and I know, I believe it's Kalen Wojcik, one of the guys from Modern Day Sniper, does this quite a lot, where if a load changes, like as far as he gets a different batch of powder and it speeds up, slows down, he doesn't worry about the number of how many grains is going in the case. He chases the speed number on the chronograph. So he tries to get the load back to, like, let's say it was doing 27.25 and suddenly now we're at 27.15 or 27.35. Well, or higher, he doesn't go, but this is the same amount of powder. He just adapts it until it's back at 27, 25, like where it was hammering, and he changes it, and so he changes the speed. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I went and changed seating depth and saw he improved what was going on for me.
Yep.
But maybe I needed to throw it on the chrono and go, hang on, I'm at a different speed node now than where I used to be. So the barrel's timed differently.
Yeah.
I need to throw more or less powder in the case and then get it back to that same original speed that was shooting well. So I see what you're saying, and I don't have it answered for myself.
It's not looking for an answer. It's purely just in terms of like that. These are sort of this is why reloading can be so nuanced, and you go, oh yeah, it's this, and you're like, well, is it? Is it? And to bring the point that you were actually making was data collection, and so had you collected robust data in the beginning, you could collect robust data afterwards and really be able to nail down this one. And I suspect it's a combination of the two. I don't think you're wrong in your assessment, by the way. That worked. And that's where, you go back to analytical. Did it work? It worked. Yeah. Solved the problem and I was able to do it and replicate it. But to collect that and collect that data robustly at the beginning across everything, the known, and it would have been a knowledge thing. I suspect now if you were to do it now, you would collect more data, you would have more information, so you can quantify that the next time it happens. You're like, last time I changed the seating depth, but that might have changed this. Now I'll be able to change the seating depth, but also watch my chronograph, or I'll just play with the node a little bit and see where it is. So, I think it would be interesting to see when it happens again. This is the joy. This is why you can go so deep on reloading.
Too deep.
Too deep. Too deep.
Should be the name of the podcast.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe we'll
call it Too Deep.
In the, I'd like to, if you've got time, in the next episode of the From the Bench podcast, downstairs in our new warehouse is sitting all the reloading gear, and we haven't set it up yet.
Okay.
Thinking we could set that up and talk your listeners through our decisions of what goes where.
Yep.
Depending on how it all goes together.
Your reloading setup downstairs is probably going to be so much nicer than mine, so I'm probably just going to be drooling all over.
I don't know. You got some pretty nice kit.
Really? Oh, you're talking about my fancy new scales and stuff.
Scales and Anyway, it's all right.
Well, that was actually also something that I wanted to add in here. I don't know if we covered this with Steve. And this was something that Steve and I did. So after we did your loads, you were bombed out, obviously, because you got up so early, did your 7-hour drive. You went to bed. Steve and I stayed up, and I reloaded ammo. He came and helped me.
Yes.
Reload ammo for a match that I didn't go to.
But you didn't end up going?
No, not that weekend. So we reloaded ammo for like the next day, and then I decided, I was like, no, I'm going to spend some time with the family instead. It's just a club match. I'll go the following weekend.
Gotcha.
That was a fun experience, but we decided to run, because your load development was done on your Hornady auto charge unit. We had my A&D scale sitting there. We decided to throw on your Hornady auto charge and then check them across the A&D, which we hadn't been doing when we were doing your load data. Interesting results. It was pretty good. I was throwing together some sort of practice ammo / club ammo, so I was happy with the numbers I was getting. But it made me think, and Steve and I sort of both chatted and agreed that when you're doing load development, if you've got one of these sort of like a Hornady auto charge unit, or what is the other brands?
RCBS
Chargemaster Light, something like that. They're like great units. You can pump out good ammo and you can pump it out fast. Totally adequate. There's dudes winning national level matches that throw on these exact units.
Yeah.
You don't need the A&D auto trickler setup.
But it helps.
It would help. It would be nice. I would actually recommend, when doing load development, trying to find a powder charge and finding the nodes and stuff, to use a beam scale, because we found that the variance although it wasn't too big, it was good enough for the desired outcome of shooting matches and stuff. The variance was big enough that it would throw off the data of doing load development.
Yeah.
So when load developing, if you don't have access to an A&D or so expensive electronic scale, or even if you do, there'd be nothing wrong with still just running the beam scale, because it is so precise, slow, but can be very precise, so that that the results you get over the chronograph or / on the target, if you don't have a chronograph and you're just using a target at distance to check things, you know that you can trust that when you write 41.8 grains of powder, 41 as close as you can get to 41.8 grains of powder when in the case, not a slight overthrow by the unit or a slight underthrow. And I think a little bit of what we might have seen with your gun, that like those. Remember how we had there was like a weird number.
We often would have a number that just didn't seem to make
quite
sense.
line up. Yeah. And I think that may have been to do with that unit or the fact that we might not have warmed that unit up properly before.
I think we warmed it up pretty well. And one of the things is that I haven't played extensively with that, but I remember the next morning you told me sort of what variation you were getting. I'm like, oh, great. Did you play with the settings?
No, yeah.
And you went, what?
Yeah.
And I knew from previously having an auto charge from having the Hornady auto charger previously and from having two RCBS Charge Masters, that those things respond well to some tweaking. And so that the variations you can get with those things, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, by the way, going to beam scale for low dev or going to A&D or something like that for low dev. Absolutely. But of course, anything you can do to be more consistent with your powder throwing is also beneficial. Yeah. And so one of the things that most of the Lymans or any of those units, the auto thrower units, will do is allow you to adjust the rate at which it trickles and the time at which it trickles for. And I have found both of those adjustments play a big role in consistency of throwing powder. Yeah. And so you're slowing the machine down a little bit. So when it, like, rather than it stopping at 0.5 grain and then trickling that last little bit, stopping it at 1 grain short and having it trickle that, and then winding that trickle speed down.
Yeah. So people put a drop tube or a straw or something on there as well, so that it trickles a little bit better. Yeah.
And so having that ability to be able to control it, and I have definitely seen a lift in consistency by adjusting that. I haven't done that with that Auto Charge Pro because I just haven't used it enough, or I haven't sat down and actually played with it for long enough. Hopefully in the new place we will. But I have certainly seen on multiple models previously from different brands, that definitely plays a role, and you end up with more consistent loads. And I think I'd be interested to do that test again, running between the two scales. In fact, I intend to, and we intend to film it, between those two to see how good we can get the convenience of the speed versus the price that you pay as a balance. So, but I think from a load development point of view, beam scales or borrowing someone's high-end sort of stuff, or even just having a higher end scale there you can throw it onto, so it does the throw, you put it on there, and then it tells you, even having the beam scales where the auto charge unit does the speed, you put it on, that's correct, and away you go. Cross-checking it is I mean, that's sensible to do anyway.
Cool. All right, well, I guess we've sort of caught up, we've covered some stuff.
We probably covered
we probably
more.
should go play with this reloading. So
let's give it a go.
Yeah, mate, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for making this possible. We'll talk again very shortly.
Good stuff. Keep it up.
Standard deviation of 6.4, extreme strength.